What if I told you that 4 simple words from a desperate alien child could awaken technology so ancient and powerful that it would force the entire galaxy to choose between eternal war and impossible peace? What if the key to humanity's greatest triumph wasn't found in our weapons, but in our willingness to help a stranger when everyone else walked away? Some cries pierce deeper than sound. They cut through steel, through armor, through the very walls we build around our hearts. And on Nexus Station, surrounded by the endless hum of 1,000 different species going about their business, one voice would change everything. Ethan Voss had heard plenty of screams in his 43 years. On Kepler 442, when the Zari bomb ships turned the sky into fire. On Europa Base, when the reactor breach took half his squad. Hell, he'd screamed plenty himself, but this was different. "Please, someone, anyone, my mom won't wake up." The voice cracked like breaking glass. High, desperate, young. Ethan stopped dead in his tracks, his worn combat boots squeaking against the polished deck of the main concourse. Around him, the usual chaos of Nexus Station continued without pause. Traders haggling over rare minerals. Diplomats in their fancy suits pretending the war never happened. Tourists snapping photos of alien architecture they'd never understand. Nobody else had stopped. Not one damn person. Ethan turned his weathered face, scanning the crowd until he found her. Small, maybe 12 in human years, kneeling beside a motionless figure on a maintenance grating near the transport terminal. Her skin had that distinctive purple hue of the Outer Rim colonies with intricate silver markings that seemed to shimmer under the station's artificial lighting. Zeri heritage, no question about it. The woman on the ground, her mother presumably wore the same coloring, but darker, more mature. Her breathing was shallow, labored. The kind of breathing Ethan had seen too many times in field hospitals. The kind that said time was running out. "Mom, please, you said we were safe here. You promised." The girl's voice broke again, and something twisted in Ethan's chest. A familiar ache he'd tried to bury for 15 years. A maintenance drone hovered nearby, its sensors blinking red as it scanned the unconscious woman. Non-priority medical situation detected. It announced in that cold mechanical tone. Standard emergency services have been notified. Estimated response time, 47 minutes. 47 minutes, hell. Ethan had seen people die in 47 seconds. The girl looked up, then her large, luminous eyes meeting his across the crowded concourse. Those eyes, they reminded him of someone. Someone he'd failed to save a long time ago, but this time would be different. "Sir," her voice was barely a whisper now, hope and desperation warring in those alien features. "Please, can you help? I don't know what to do. I don't know anyone here, and she's all I have left." Ethan felt every eye in the immediate area suddenly focus on him. A human veteran, scarred and grim, standing over 2 aliens who clearly didn't belong in this part of the station. He could see the calculations running behind their expressions. The risk assessments, the social mathematics that said walking away was the smart play. Smart, safe, sensible. Ethan had never been accused of being any of those things. He stepped forward, his knees protesting as he crouched beside the fallen woman. Up close, he could see the details the drone's sensors had missed. The travel stains on their clothes. The hollow look of people who'd been in running for too long. The way the girl's hand trembled as she clutched her mother's arm. "What's your name, kid?" he asked, his voice gentler than it had been in years. "Niari," she whispered. "And this is my mom, Elin. We came here because she said humans were different now, that you'd help people like us." People like us. The phrase hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He'd heard it before in different words and different languages, but always with the same desperate hope underneath. Always from people who had nowhere else to turn. Ethan slipped his arms under Ellen's shoulders and knees, lifting her with the practiced ease of someone who'd carried plenty of wounded soldiers off plenty of battlefields. She was lighter than he'd expected, which worried him more than he wanted to admit. "Where are you taking her?" Niari scrambled to her feet, clutching a small travel bag to her chest. "Medical Bay Level 7, best doctor on the station." Ethan started walking his long strides, forcing the girl to hurry to keep up. "Dr. Halst doesn't ask questions, doesn't report to corporate, and he's saved more lives than the fancy, automated systems they've got in the premium sectors." As they moved through the crowds, Ethan noticed the stares intensifying, a few pointed whispers. Someone actually stepped back as they passed, as if whatever had struck down Ellen might be contagious. "Mr. Voss." Nyari's voice was small, uncertain. Ethan nearly stumbled. "How do you know my name?" The girl bit her lower lip, those large eyes darting away. "My mom. When she was dreaming, she kept saying it. Voss. She said you'd come back, that you promised." Promised. Ethan's mind raced, trying to place the woman in his arms. The face was familiar now that he really looked at it. Familiar in the way that old wounds ache before storms. But the memory stayed just out of reach, dancing at the edges of his consciousness like smoke. They reached the medical bay as Ellen stirred in his arms. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused, but searching. When they found his face, she smiled. It was a broken thing, but genuine. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice barely audible. You came back, just like you said you would." Before he could respond, before he could ask the 1,000 questions burning in his throat, her eyes rolled back and she went limp again. But that smile, that moment of recognition, it hit him like lightning. Suddenly, he remembered everything. Kepler 442, 3 years into the human-Zari War. The evacuation of New Geneva Colony. Ethan's hands trembled as the memories flooded back. He'd been a lieutenant then, leading a squad of Marines through the chaos of a dying world. The Zari had come without warning, their crystal ships cutting through the atmosphere like knives through silk. But not all of them had come to destroy. He remembered her now, Ellen Vasari, a Zari defector who tried to warn the colonies about the incoming assault. She'd been young then, maybe 25, with those same luminous eyes her daughter inherited. She'd saved hundreds of lives with her intelligence, and Ethan had promised to get her off-world before the orbital bombardment began. But promises made in wartime have a way of breaking. "Doc," Ethan called out as they entered the medical bay. The space was cramped but clean, filled with the gentle hum of advanced diagnostic equipment that had seen better decades. "I need help here, Doctor." Jasper Halst emerged from behind a wall of monitors, his cybernetic left eye whirring as it focused on Ethan's burden. Half his face was synthetic now, the result of a shuttle crash 5 years back, but his hands were still steady as a surgeon's. Well, the infamous Ethan Voss gracing my humble establishment." Halst's voice carried the trace of an accent from the inner colonies. "And carrying precious cargo, I see." Ethan gently placed Ellen on the examination table, watching as Halst's scanners immediately began their work. Streams of data flowed across holographic displays, painting a picture that made the doctor's expression grow increasingly grim. "Nyari, right?" Ethan turned to the girl who was hovering near her mother's ear like a protective spirit. "Tell me what happened. How long has she been like this?" 2 days, Nyari whispered, her small hands clutching the edge of the examination table. "Maybe 3. Time gets fuzzy when you're traveling in the cargo holds of freight ships. She was fine when we left Arcturus Station, but then she started getting weak. Fever? Said her blood felt wrong." Halst's cybernetic eye flickered as it processed the scan results. "Malnutrition, dehydration, chronic stress, and..." He paused, his organic eye narrowing. "That's interesting." "What kind of interesting..." Ethan's voice carried the edge of a man who'd heard too many bad diagnoses. "She's got nanites in her bloodstream, but not the standard medical variety. These are older, military grade, and they're fighting something." Halst's fingers danced across his control interface, bringing up a microscopic view of Elaine's blood cells. "See these silver traces? They're trying to repair cellular damage, but they're also adapting, evolving." Nyari stepped closer, her eyes wide with fear. "Is that bad?" "The nanites, I mean." "Depends on your perspective, kid." Halst's voice was carefully neutral. "Your mother's been exposed to some form of biological warfare agent, probably years ago. The nanites are keeping her alive, but they're also changing her. And if I'm reading these scans correctly..." A sharp alarm suddenly pierced the air. Red lights began flashing throughout the medical bay as the station's security system came online. "Attention all personnel," a cold, automated voice announced over the intercom. "Priority security sweep in progress. All individuals matching the following biometric profiles are to be detained for questioning." Ethan felt his blood turn to ice as a holographic image materialized in the center of the room. Ellen's face, younger but unmistakable, rotated slowly above the projector. The text below read, "Wanted for crimes against the Terran Confederation. Reward 500,000 credits." Son of a bitch, wow. Halst muttered, his hands already moving to shut down the external scanners. That medical scan just painted a target on all of you. Nyari's face went pale, her silver markings seeming to dim in the harsh red light of the alarms. They found us. But how? We were so careful. Ethan's mind raced. The nanites. Of course. Any deep medical scan would pick up their unique signature, and if they were military grade from the war, the Confederation had been hunting Zari war criminals for 15 years, even the ones who tried to help. "There's something else," Halst said quietly, his voice barely audible over the alarms. "The nanites aren't just keeping her alive. They're protecting something. Her genetic code shows signs of deliberate modification. Recent modification." "What are you saying?" Ethan demanded. "I'm saying your friend here isn't just a war refugee Voss. She's been part of something bigger. Something that ended very recently." Halst's cybernetic eye whirred as it focused on Nyari. "And I think the real question isn't why they're hunting her." The doctor's gaze shifted to the girl who had gone very still beside her mother's bed. "The question is why they want the kid." As if summoned by his words, the sound of heavy boots echoed through the corridor outside, multiple sets moving with military precision, the kind of boots that belonged to people who shot first and asked questions later. Ethan's hand instinctively moved to the plasma pistol concealed beneath his jacket. Old habits from a war that never really ended. "How many ways out of here, Doc?" "Officially one." Halst was already moving, gathering medical supplies and data chips with practiced efficiency. "Unofficially, well, let's just say I've had to make some creative renovations over the years." The footsteps stopped directly outside the medical bay door. "Nyari," Ethan whispered, moving to shield both mother and daughter with his body. "Whatever happens next, stay close to me. And whatever you do, don't let them see what you can do." But the girl's eyes widened. "How did you?" "Because your mother told me about you. 15 years ago when you were just a possibility. She said you were going to be special. She said you were going to change everything." The door to the medical bay hissed open, and Ethan Voss found himself face to face with the ghosts of a war he thought he had left behind. 3 figures stood in the doorway, and none of them looked like station security. The first was tall, lean, with the kind of augmented reflexes that came from military-grade cybernetics. His armor was black, unmarked, expensive. Corporate mercenary, probably Titan Industries. The second was shorter, stocker, with burn scars running down the left side of his face. Ex-military, like Ethan, but the wrong kind. The kind that enjoyed the work a little too much. The third made Ethan's blood run cold. She was human, maybe 30, with pale skin and dead eyes that seemed to catalog everything in the room like a targeting computer. But it wasn't her appearance that chilled him. It was the way she moved, the way she held herself. He'd seen that stance before in the worst parts of the war. Black Ops, the kind of soldier who didn't officially exist. "Ethan Voss," she said, her voice flat and professional. "Former Lieutenant, 3rd Marine Expeditionary Force. Decorated veteran of the Kepler 442 evacuation." Her dead eyes shifted to the examination table. "Currently harboring a known war criminal and her offspring." "Lady, I think you've got the wrong room," Halst said, stepping forward with his hands raised. "This is a medical facility. We don't get involved in politics." The woman's gaze flicked to him for exactly 1 second. "Dr. Jasper Halst, former Confederation Navy surgeon, court-martialed for refusing to follow Protocol 7 during the siege of New Byzantium." Her smile was razor-thin. "We know exactly where we are, Doctor." Protocol 7. Ethan's jaw clenched. The order to let alien casualties die rather than waste medical supplies on enemy combatants. The order that had gotten more good doctors kicked out of the service than enemy action ever had. "What do you want?" Ethan kept his voice level, his hand still resting near his concealed weapon. "The Zari female and her hybrid offspring. Alive preferably, but we're flexible on that point." The woman took a step into the room, and Ethan could see the micro-movement of targeting systems in her cybernetic implants. "They're wanted for questioning regarding Project Synthesis." Nyari made a small sound, half fear and half recognition. Ethan glanced at her, saw the terror in those luminous eyes, and made his decision. Never heard of it. The woman's smile widened, showing teeth that had been sharpened to points. Of course you haven't. It was classified above your pay grade, Lieutenant. But your friend Ellen was one of the primary research subjects, along with a dozen other Zari volunteers who thought they were helping to end the war. Mom tried to help, Nyari whispered, her voice barely audible. She said humans and Zari could work together. She said the fighting could stop. Oh, it did stop, little hybrid. The woman's attention focused on Nyari like a laser sight. Your mother's genetic material helped us develop some very interesting applications. Weapons that could target specific alien DNA sequences. Nanite swarms that could reprogram enemy biology. And of course, the most successful experiment of all. She pointed directly at Nyari. A half-human, half-Zari child capable of interfacing with ancient precursor technology. The kind of technology that could shift the balance of power in this galaxy forever. Ethan felt the pieces clicking into place like rounds loading into a magazine. Synthesis. You weren't trying to end the war. You were trying to win it. Permanently. The Confederation has many interests, Mr. Voss. Some more visible than others. The woman gestured to her companions. Now we can do this the easy way, or we can do this the way that leaves this medical bay looking like a Zari bombing run. Your choice. Hall stepped closer to his control console, his fingers hovering over what looked like standard medical controls. But Ethan had seen enough improvised weapons to know a detonator trigger when he saw one. There's a third option, the doctor said quietly. Oh, the woman raised an eyebrow. You can go to hell. Hall's hands slammed down on the trigger. The explosion wasn't massive, but it didn't need to be. The shaped charges he'd hidden in the outer wall blew a hole straight through into the maintenance tunnel beyond, while emergency foam immediately sealed the breach from the quarterside. Smoke filled the air, alarms screamed, and in the chaos, Ethan grabbed Nyari while Hall scooped up the still unconscious Ellen. Move, Ethan shouted, pushing through the hole into the narrow maintenance tunnel. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting everything in hellish red. Behind them, he could hear the mercenaries recovering their equipment and automatically compensating for the smoke and debris. Professional killers didn't stay down long. This way, Hulse led them through a maze of service corridors that ran between the station's main sections. I've got a safe route to Docking Bay 7. There's a ship there, old but functional. Whose ship? Ethan asked, supporting Nyari as she stumbled through the narrow passage. Mine. I may be a disgraced doctor, but I have always believed in having an exit strategy. They'd made it maybe 50 meters when the first pulse rounds started chewing through the tunnel walls behind them. The mercenaries had breached the medical bay and were following their trail with military efficiency. They're fast, Nyari panted, clutching her mother's travel bag to her chest. They're professionals, Ethan corrected. But so am I. He stopped at a junction in the tunnel system, pulling a small device from his jacket. A proximity mine, military grade, left over from his active duty days. Some habits died hard. Keep going, he told Halst. I'll catch up. Ethan, no, Nyari grabbed his arm. You can't fight them all. He looked down at her, this girl who carried the hopes and fears of two species in her blood, and saw something that made his chest tight. Trust, absolute unwavering trust that he would keep her safe, just like her mother had trusted him 15 years ago. Kids, sometimes fighting isn't about winning. Sometimes it's about making sure the people you care about have time to run. He activated the mine and gently pushed her toward Halst. Take care of them, Doc. And when Elin wakes up, tell her I kept my promise this time. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the tunnel as Ethan positioned himself between the hunters and their prey. His plasma pistol felt heavy in his hand but familiar. Comforting even. Behind him, he could hear Nyari calling his name, her voice growing fainter as Halst pulled her away towards safety. Ahead, death approached with professional precision and unlimited ammunition. Ethan Voss smiled grimly and waited for the war to find him one more time. The first mercenary rounded the corner just as the proximity mine detonated. The blast shook the entire tunnel system, emergency lights flickering as debris rained down from the ceiling. But when the smoke cleared, Ethan's heart sank. The lead mercenary was still standing, his armor scarred but intact, energy shields shimmering around him like deadly aurora. Military-grade protection. corporate funding. These weren't just bounty hunters. Impressive, Lieutenant. The woman's voice echoed through the tunnel, calm despite the explosion. But we didn't come here unprepared. Ethan squeezed off 3 quick shots with his plasma pistol, the energy bolts lighting up the narrow space like captured lightning. The first merc's shields absorbed the impacts, barely flickering. Professional killers with professional equipment. He was outgunned, out-armored, and running out of tunnel. Behind him, he could hear Halst and Nyari making their way toward the docking bay. Every second he bought them was a second closer to escape. Every second was worth it. The scarred mercenary raised his weapon, some kind of experimental pulse rifle, that hummed with enough energy to punch through station bulkheads. Ethan dove sideways, feeling the heat wash over him as the blast scorched the wall where he'd been standing. That's when he heard it, a sound like crystal wind chimes mixed with a subsonic thrum that seemed to resonate in his bones. The temperature in the tunnel dropped 10 degrees in an instant, and every piece of electronic equipment began to flicker. What the hell? The scarred merc's rifle sparked and died in his hands. Ethan risked a glance back toward the docking bay and saw something impossible. Ellen was standing but not standing. She was floating 3 inches off the tunnel floor, her eyes blazing with silver light, her hair moving in a wind that didn't exist. The nanites in her bloodstream were visible now, racing beneath her purple skin like liquid starlight. You want to know about Project Synthesis? Her voice carried harmonics that no human throat should have been able to produce. Let me show you what you created. The lead mercenary, the woman with the dead eyes, took an involuntary step backward. Impossible. The nanites were designed to be dormant unless triggered by specific genetic markers. They were, Ellen said and smiled. It was terrible and beautiful and absolutely lethal. But you never understood what you were really dealing with. You thought the Precursors were just another extinct species, another source of ancient technology to exploit. The air itself seemed to thicken around them. Ethan's pistol grew warm in his hand, its energy cells overcharging without any input from him. But they're not extinct. They're sleeping. And my daughter is the key that wakes them up. Nyari stepped out from behind Halst, and Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The girl was glowing. Not metaphorically, literally glowing with the same silver light that raced through her mother's veins. But where Ellen's power felt wild, uncontrolled, Nyari's was focused, precise, purposeful. "Mom, you're hurt," Nyari said, her young voice somehow carrying the weight of centuries. "Let me help." She reached out and touched the nearest wall panel, and every system in that section of the station came alive. Emergency lights blazed like miniature suns. Gravity fluctuated. And somewhere deep in the station's core, something ancient and vast stirred to consciousness. The mercenaries' equipment didn't just malfunction. It evolved. Their armor began to shift and change, adapting to threats that didn't exist yet. Their ready weapons started targeting systems that weren't there. Their cybernetic implants began showing them data from sensors 1,000 light years away. "Shut it down!" the woman screamed, pulling out what looked like an electromagnetic pulse grenade. "Shut it down now!" But it was too late. Nyari had made contact with the station's central network, and through that network, she'd touched something infinitely larger. The precursor technology that humanity had been stealing and reverse engineering for decades wasn't dead metal and crystal. It was alive, waiting, and it recognized her. "My name is Nyari Vasari," the girl said, her voice echoing through dimensions that human science didn't have names for. "Daughter of Eleneta, who chose love over loyalty. Daughter of the stars who will bridge the gap between what was and what could be." The tunnel around them began to change. The metal walls grew translucent, revealing the vast complexity of systems hidden within the station. Energy flowed in patterns that hurt to look at, directly connecting nodes of power that spanned half the galaxy. Ethan realized with growing awe and terror that Nexus Station wasn't just built on a precursor site. It was a precursor site. The entire structure was one massive piece of ancient technology dormant for millennia, waiting for the right genetic key to wake it up. "You wanted a weapon," Ellen said to the mercenaries who were backing away as their equipment continued to betray them. "Congratulations, you created one, but not the kind you expected." The scarred mercenary's pulse rifle suddenly reconfigured itself, becoming something that looked like it belonged in a museum of technologies that wouldn't be invented for another 1,000 years. When he tried to fire it instead of a destructive energy beam, it projected a holographic star map showing the location of every habitable world in known space. The Precursors didn't build weapons. Nyari explained, her young face serene despite the chaos around her. They built bridges, connections, ways for different species to understand each other. The woman with the dead eyes was frantically speaking into a communications device that kept changing shape in her hands. Command, we have a containment bridge. The hybrid has activated precursor systems. Repeat, we have full activation. There is no containment, Ellen said sadly. There never was. You can't cage the stars, and you can't weaponize hope. Ethan lowered his pistol, finally understanding what he was seeing. This wasn't a battle, it was a revelation. The technology that both humans and Zari had been fighting over, killing, for dying for. It was never meant for war. It was meant to end war. Forever. Nyari, he called out, his voice small in the transformed space around them. What happens now? The girl turned to look at him, and for a moment she was just a 12-year-old who'd been scared for her mother. Then the silver light in her eyes brightened, and she was something infinitely older and wiser. Now we go home, Mr. Voss, all of us, to the place where it all began. The transformation of Nexus Station lasted exactly 17 minutes. Ethan knew because he counted every second, watching in stunned silence, as centuries of hidden precursor technology revealed itself throughout the massive structure. Corridors that had been simple metal passages became flowing channels of crystalline energy. Computer terminals evolved into organic interfaces that responded to thought rather than touch. And everywhere the sound of awakening, like a vast mechanical heart beginning to beat after eons of sleep. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything went quiet. The silver light faded from Nyari's eyes. Ellen collapsed, her nanites returning to their dormant state. The mercenaries found themselves holding weapons that had reverted to standard corporate hardware, their advanced armor now little more than expensive metal plates. But the damage was done. Or perhaps more accurately, the healing had begun. The station's main computer core is broadcasting on all frequencies. Holst reported, his cybernetic eye flickering as it processed streams of data. Every ship in the system, every listening post, every military installation, they all know what just happened here. The woman with the dead eyes was backing toward the tunnel exit, her professional composure finally cracking. This isn't over, Voss. You have no idea what you've unleashed. Actually, I think I do. Ethan kept his weapon trained on her, though he suspected it wouldn't be necessary. Your bosses wanted a weapon that could control alien populations. Instead, they created a child who can show the galaxy that we're all connected, that we always have been. The Confederation will never allow it. There are trillions of credits invested in the war economy, entire corporations built on the assumption that humans and aliens will never coexist peacefully. She gestured at the transformed tunnel around them. This technology threatens all of that. Good, Ethan said simply. The mercenaries retreated, their mission clearly a failure. But Ethan knew they'd be back, with more people, better equipment, and orders that probably included burning down half the galaxy to keep this secret contained. We need to move, he told Holst. They'll regroup and come back with everything they've got. Agreed, or system, but where every station in Confederate space will be watching for us now. The doctor was already gathering medical supplies, his movements quick and efficient. And the girl, what she just did. Every government in known space is going to want to either control her or kill her. Nyari was sitting beside her other, holding Ellen's hand, as the older woman slowly regained consciousness. The girl looked exhausted, drained by whatever connection she'd made with the ancient technology. But there was something else in her expression, a kind of certainty that hadn't been there before. I know where we can go, she said quietly. The Precursors showed me. There's a place hidden in the Outer Rim, a sanctuary they built for situations like this. Situations like what? Ethan asked. When different species need time to learn how to trust each other again. Nyari helped her mother sit up, supporting her with surprising strength for such a small girl. They've been through this before, Mr. Voss. Other civilizations, other wars, other moments when everything could have gone wrong. Ellen's voice was weak but clear. The nanites, they carry more than just medical programming. They carry memories, history. the accumulated wisdom of 1,000 species that learned to put aside their differences. And now that knowledge is in you, Ethan realized. Both of you. Not just us. Nyari smiled, and for a moment she looked like any other 12-year-old girl. It's in the station now, in the network. Every ship that passes through here will carry a piece of it to other systems. The idea will spread, Mr. Voss. Slowly at first, but inevitably. Halst's cybernetic eye whirred as it processed this information. A viral concept, transmitted through direct contact with precursor technology. Brilliant, but dangerous, Ethan pointed out. If the Confederation realizes what's happening, they'll do everything they can to stop it. Quarantine entire systems if they have to. They'll try, Elena agreed, struggling to her feet with Nyari's help. But Ethan, you don't understand what your species has become. What you've always been, really. Humans don't give up. You don't accept that some problems can't be solved. And when you find something worth fighting for. She looked at her daughter, and Ethan saw 15 years of love and sacrifice and desperate hope in that gaze. You never stop fighting. They made their way to Halst's hidden ship, a modified courier vessel that had seen better decades but still looked spaceworthy. As they prepared for departure, Ethan found himself thinking about choices, about promises made in wartime and the cost of keeping them. Nyari, he said as they strapped in for launch, what you did back there, connecting with the precursor systems, are you okay? I mean, really okay? The girl considered this serious, her young face thoughtful. I can hear them now, not voices exactly, but intentions, purpose. They're not gone, Mr. Voss, the precursors. They're sleeping, but they're still here. And they're proud, I think. Proud that their children finally learned to ask the right questions. What questions? Not how do we defeat our enemies, but how do we turn our enemies into friends? Nyari's eyes sparkled with something that might have been mischief. And how do we make sure that when our children inherit the galaxy, it's a place worth living in? The ship lifted off from Nexus Station, carrying its small crew of fugitives toward the unknown. Behind them, the station continued its quiet revolution, broadcasting its message of connection and hope to every corner of known space. In the depths of space, ancient machines that had slept for millennia began to stir. And on a dozen different worlds, children who carried mixed heritage in their genes suddenly found themselves capable of impossible things. The galaxy was about to become a very different place. Ethan settled back in his seat, watching the stars wheel past the viewport, and allowed himself to smile for the first time in 15 years. He'd kept his promise after all. He'd protected Ellen and her daughter. But more than that, he'd helped them protect something infinitely larger. The future itself. So, he said to Halstead, who was piloting with the easy competence of someone who'd been running from authority for years, where exactly are we headed? Coordinates are already locked in, the doctor replied. A system called Sanctuary. Apparently it doesn't show up on any official star charts. Of course it doesn't, Ethan chuckled, feeling lighter than he had in years. Wouldn't be much of a sanctuary if everyone knew where it was. Behind them, Elenian and Nyari had fallen asleep, exhausted by their ordeal. Mother and daughter, Human and Zari, passed and were curled together in the way that families do when they're finally safe. And in the cargo hold, hidden among medical supplies and emergency rations, a small data core pulsed with gentle light. Inside it, the accumulated wisdom of the precursors waited patiently to be shared with anyone brave enough to listen. The war wasn't over. It might never truly be over. But for the first time in 20 years, peace seemed possible. And sometimes possible was enough. 3 days later, they reached Sanctuary. It wasn't what Ethan had expected. No massive space station, no hidden military base, no obvious signs of advanced civilization. Just a single planet orbiting a quiet yellow star, its surface covered in what looked like perfectly ordinary forests and oceans. If you didn't know what to look for, you'd dismiss it as another uninhabited world in the vast emptiness between the major trade routes. But Nyari knew what to look for. There, she said, pointing to what appeared to be an empty patch of atmosphere above the northern continent. Land there. Halst's instruments showed nothing but clear sky, but he'd learned to trust the girl's connection to things beyond normal perception. As they descended through the atmosphere, reality seemed to shimmer around them, And suddenly they were approaching a landing pad that definitely hadn't been there a moment before. The architecture was impossible to categorize. Part crystal, part metal, part something that might have been alive once upon a time. Buildings that flowed like water but stood solid as mountains. Bridges that existed in more dimensions than human eyes were equipped to perceive. And everywhere gardens. Not the carefully manicured landscapes of human colonies, but something wilder, more organic. Plants from a dozen different worlds growing together in harmony that should have been biologically impossible. "Welcome to what the Precursors called the teaching ground," Ellen said as they powered down the ship's engines. Her voice was stronger now, the nanites in her bloodstream having stabilized during the journey. "A place where species can learn to coexist without the pressure of politics or profit margins." As they disembarked, Ethan was surprised to see other ships parked around the landing area. Some were human designs, others clearly alien, and a few looked like they belonged to species he'd never encountered before. All bore the subtle modifications that suggested long journeys and difficult decisions. "How many people know about this place?" he asked. "More than you might think," a new voice answered. "Fewer than we might hope." Ethan turned to see a figure approaching from the nearest building. Human, middle-aged, wearing clothes that looked comfortable rather than impressive. But there was something in her bearing her confident stride that suggested authority earned rather than inherited. Commander Sarah Chen, formerly of the Terran Navy, she introduced herself, extending a hand, currently serving as what you might call the Welcome Committee for new arrivals. "You're military," Ethan observed, noting the way she moved the way her eyes automatically cataloged potential threats and escape routes. "Former military," Chen corrected, "like about half the people here. Turns out there are quite a few of us who got tired of fighting wars for people who profit from the fighting." She gestured toward the settlement beyond the landing pad, where Ethan could see figures moving between the impossible buildings. Some were clearly human, others just as clearly weren't, and many seemed to be something in between. "This is what the galaxy could look like," Chen continued, "if we spent half as much energy on understanding each other as we do on finding new ways to kill each other." Niari stepped forward, her hand finding Ethan's. "Mr. Voss, this is where we part ways." "What do you mean?" A cold fist clenched around Ethan's heart. "Kid, we just got you to safety. I can't stay hidden," Niari interrupted gently. "What happened on Nexus Station, what I awakened? It's just the beginning. The precursor technology is spreading, yes, but slowly. Too slowly. There are children like me being born on dozens of worlds, and they need someone to show them what they're capable of." Ellen placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "The nanites carry more than memories, Ethan. They carry a kind of genetic blueprint, a map for creating connections between species that evolution never intended." "You're talking about leaving," Ethan said flatly, "going back out there where the Confederation and every other government in known space wants to either capture you or kill you." "I'm talking about doing what needs to be done, ma'am." Niari's young voice carried a weight of determination that reminded Ethan painfully of another young person he'd once known. Another idealist who'd believed that courage and good intentions could change the world. He'd failed that young person 15 years ago. He wasn't going to fail this one. "Then I'm coming with you." "Ethan, no," Ellen shook her head. "You have done enough, more than enough. You saved us, you kept your promise, "I made a promise to get you both to safety," Ethan interrupted. "But I'm making a new promise now. To make sure that kid gets the chance to change the galaxy the way she's supposed to." Chen smiled, and Ethan caught a glimpse of the idealistic young officer she'd probably been once upon a time. "Sanctuary isn't a retirement home, Mr. Voss. It's a staging ground. We've got ship supplies and volunteers from 47 different species, all waiting for someone to show them how to turn hope into action." Over the next several hours, as Ethan toured the settlement and met its inhabitants, he began to understand the scope of what was happening. Sanctuary wasn't just a hidden refuge. It was the heart of a network that spanned half the galaxy, connecting individuals and groups who shared a common vision of what the future could be. There was Dr. Kess, a Zari scientist who'd spent 20 years developing medical treatments that worked on both human and alien physiology. Captain Torres, a human smuggler who'd been running supplies to refugee camps in the border systems. Ambassador Veltar, a diplomatic exile from the hegemony, who'd been quietly building bridges between species that had been enemies for centuries, and dozens of others, saw people who'd reached the same conclusion that the old ways of thinking, the old assumptions about conflict and competition and the impossibility of true cooperation were not only wrong but actively harmful. The precursors didn't fail, Nyari explained that evening, as they sat in a garden where flowers from Earth grew next to crystalline formations that hummed with their own inner light. They just realized that forced evolution doesn't work. Change has to come from within, from choice. So they built places like this, Ilan added, sanctuaries where different species could learn to trust each other gradually, naturally, and they seeded the galaxy with the tools that would be needed when the time was right. Tools like you, Ethan said, looking at Nyari, tools like all of us. The girl smiled and starlight seemed to gather in her silver-marked features. Humans, Zari, all the other species out there who are tired of being afraid of each other. The precursors didn't create a weapon, Mr. Voss. They created a possibility. That night, as Ethan lay in a bed that was somehow perfectly comfortable despite being made of materials he couldn't identify, he thought about possibilities, about choices made in desperate moments and the long chain of consequences that followed, about promises kept and promises yet to be made. Outside his window, the impossible city glowed softly in the light of unfamiliar stars. Somewhere in that light, children who carried the heritage of multiple species were learning that the barriers between their people were not as solid as they'd been taught to believe. And somewhere beyond those stars, on ships and stations and worlds throughout known space, the message that had begun on Nexus Station continued to spread, slowly, quietly, but inevitably. The galaxy was changing, not through conquest or revolution, but through connection. Through the radical idea that differences could be strengths rather than weaknesses. That enemies could become allies and allies could become family. It wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks, failures, moments when the old fears and hatreds seemed stronger than the new hopes. But for the first time in his life, Ethan Voss believed that peace was more than just a temporary absence of war. It was a choice that every person, human or alien, would have to make for themselves. And judging by the children's laughter echoing through the gardens of Sanctuary, more and more people were choosing hope. The next morning, Ethan stood on the landing pad beside Hall's ship, now refueled and restocked for the journey ahead. Ilan and Nyari were saying goodbye to the friends they'd made during their brief stay at Promises being exchanged along with hugs and tears. "You sure about this, Voss?" Hall asked, running a final diagnostic on the ship's systems. "We could stay here, set up a nice little medical practice, treat stubbed toes and homesickness, instead of gunshot wounds and nanite poisoning." "I'm sure," Ethan replied, watching as Nyari gently touched the hand of a young Zari boy who'd been born with human-compatible lungs. The child gasped in wonder as his breathing suddenly became easier, his mixed heritage finally finding harmony instead of conflict. "Besides," Ethan added, "I think we're about to become very busy." As their ship lifted off from Sanctuary, carrying its cargo of hope toward an uncertain but promising future, the message that had begun with a simple cry for help continued to spread across the galaxy. "Please help my mother." 4 words that had changed everything. And in the end, maybe that's all it ever took. Someone willing to ask for help and someone else willing to answer. The rest, as they say, was just the beginning. If this story touched something deep inside you, if it made you believe that maybe we're all more connected than we think, then I've got one small favor to ask. Hit that like button to let me know this resonated with you. Subscribe to the channel if you want more stories about hope triumphing over fear, about the power of choosing compassion over conflict. And most importantly, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because just like in our story, sometimes the most powerful changes begin with the simplest actions. One person reaching out to another. One moment of courage in the face of fear. What did you think about Nyari's power to awaken ancient technology? Do you believe that understanding between different peoples is possible? Or are we doomed to repeat the same conflicts forever? Let me know in the comments below. Your thoughts and discussions make this community what it is. Until next time, keep believing in the possibility that tomorrow can be better than today. Keep choosing hope. And remember, sometimes the most human thing you can do is help someone who doesn't look anything like you. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.